not only do we need to feel like there's some give in you, that you're agreeable enough that I can work with you, and you're not going to be rigid. Competence, and I don't know what that looks like when we're showing up and acting competent. Like, notice me even right now, if you can see my picture, I rose in my seat and I got a little bit more upright, and I'm making my voice a little bit stronger. Like, I'm trying to convey something, and it obviously what I'm talking about in the content matters. It's like, do I sound like I know what I'm doing? Do I sound like I have a way to get something done? And does the content go with that? So it's, the content has to be competent, but the person saying it needs to show up kind of competently, or what happens? Right? That's the question. If I don't convey competence, what does that start to do to us, right? You're welcome to type in, but I'll get to the chase here because of time, is that when we sound competent, I also send the signal to other people that I can get things done, that I can back up what I say I'm going to do, right? That I go, he knows what he's doing, and I think he's going to deliver on his promise, right? So these are some of the two basic things we want from people we don't know and don't have a relationship reason for trusting, but I'm trying to decide, how am I going to work with you? And it's, do I appear open and flexible? And do I seem like I can back up what I say I'm going to do and deliver on my promises? So these are things that, like, these are sort of the hidden things. And I'm going to kind of cite Heidi Halverson, who wrote a book called No One Understands You and What to Do About It, which is one of the better sources I know, especially for people who've dug themselves into a bit of a reputational hole, which is not always easy to climb out of in your career, but she does address that in a way that almost nobody else does. But she puts it even more clearly, and it's funny that it actually connects with the title of Dr. Galinsky's book. You know, we're trying to figure out, are you a friend or a foe? Like, can I rely on you in some way? When we don't know people, we have to guess about that, and we can't not guess about it. And will I act on my intentions? That's the competence side of this. And we do this unconsciously. She writes more about this. If you're interested, you can pursue her work. But notice the way warmth and competence go together. They sort of need each other, right? So I'm going to get at this idea I call polarities at the very beginning of our call today, that if I'm all competence and no warmth, there may be some upside to that, that there's probably going to be some downside to always being experienced as all competence and no warmth. I may get respect, may go, oh, he really knows what he's doing, he's really smart, blah, 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 blah. But if I'm unapproachable, I may limit the connectivity I have in the system of people who are willing to do business. They may just be afraid of me, right? That's not so good, right? You don't want people afraid. Maybe you do want people afraid of you. I don't generally think people being afraid of me is a positive way for me to kind of fulfill my purpose in things. And if I'm all warmth, if I'm all open, all agreeable, all these things, and I don't look like I can back it up, at some point I'm going to go, yeah, I like Fred a lot, but I can't rely on him to deliver, right? So these two things kind of need each other, and that's what we call a polarity. They're interdependent things that need each other, but they feel really different when you think about, what do I want? If I want to give off that sense, that, here's an American word, vibe, if I want people to get warmth and confidence from me, I've got to sort of source that from me in different ways. And I've got to hope that the outside of me is congruent with that I look warm and competent at the same time, or that I can kind of move and become more warm when I need to and appear more competent when I need to. Like, remember when I got upright and I can lean into competence when I think that's important, but I can also open up and be warm when I think I need to do that. So how do I get the range in me that would be helpful? Now, your 360 results don't get that precise on these things, but you may have picked up clues about things like this, whether in the comments or in the numbers there. And I'm going to kind of give you fill out a little bit more this polarity idea, these two things that sort of need each other, and that hopefully we can convey over time. So I've already mentioned this task and relationship polarity, right? If I only focus on task and don't worry about relationship, there's some downside effects kick in, and vice versa. We've already talked about warmth and competence. This next one also is a companion to this, humility and confidence, right? So competence and confidence are a little bit different things, but they don't tease out separately in terms of how we appear to others. But this idea of confidence, this kind of authority that I kind of carry from myself, and this belief or trust in myself and what I'm about, has an effect on people. And some of you may have feedback that says, man, you need to be more confident. Well, it's like, how do I boot that up? How do I learn to trust myself more and not lose the humility that keeps me open to feedback and able to acknowledge when I maybe make a mistake or don't live up to something, and that is open to other people. So how do I keep confidence and humility together with people and lean into one at times and lean into the other at other times? Again, they need each other, along with decisiveness and openness. There are times when I need to make a decision. I need to kind of get behind it and ask you to go with me. And we're done negotiating around it. And there's times when I really need to take in that other input and listen carefully and show that I can adapt and that I can use other people's input to shape a decision, right? So how do I be both of those things and know when to lean into one or the other? This is sort of the deeper art of learning to lead, is how do I hold these kinds of things together and learn to kind of play them both appropriately so that I can have the effect that I want. Now, if it sounds like I'm acting in the theater sense, it's kind of correct. We are learning to be ourselves. And there can be some awkwardness in learning to be ourselves and trying out new things, and expanding our range always has us trying out stuff, even if we're not fully comfortable with what that is, and even if it may look a little awkward to others. So in that sense, if it's acting, it's not wrong. It's us trying to be what situations need for us in order to fulfill our purposes. So there's a background thing I'm trying to say here to you all, that like this interest in getting better and this interest in growing is always going to have some discomfort in it. It's always going to have some awkwardness in it. It's always going to have us kind of reaching in places, even where people might misunderstand what we're doing. And that's the risk that comes with being interested in growing and learning. And I hope you're willing to go there. I hope in this course, you've even gathered more sort of courage to go into the uncomfortable places just enough so that something new and good can happen. Okay, enough of that speech. Watching time. We got about 15 minutes left. I want to touch on culture a little bit, because this is what this week's work is really about. You've probably all heard this phrase that kind of culture eats strategy for lunch. It's kind of a funny phrase. That's why it travels around the world over and over and over again. But there's something incredibly important about culture. It's kind of like leadership. Like when you kind of go, what's missing? We go leadership. And we say, what's getting in the way of progress? We go culture, because it sort of becomes this placeholder for these hidden and complex things that we know the system needs, but we don't necessarily always know how to get it when we need it. So I'm wondering, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What is it about culture that makes it hard to change, right? I mean, it's almost by definition hard to change, because, culture is the way we have internalized how things get done around here. It becomes almost the thoughtless default ways we do business, so that we're actually not consciously often thinking about them. They just have become a part of how we do things around here. Now, those of you who've changed organizations or changed industries or moved around the world, or sometimes even just moved down the hall, you may have noticed changes in sort of cultural elements, that people do things differently here than they did there. So it's not like culture is always the same. It's clearly not, right? And even this discussion we had earlier today about diversity, is people come from different, people have been cultured in different ways that can bring different things to the proverbial party that we're in. But it's very nature that it allows us to have things we don't have to think about all the time. Means that if you want to change it, you got to get people to think about it more. You've got to indulge it. You've got to start to say, we want, instead of what we used to produce out of our culture, we now want more of something and less of something else. And that often that's not just a behavior change issue. That's sort of a deeper change issue. So when we're actually in the territory of culture, we can't just post new mission statements that revise our purpose. We can't just post new vision statements. We can't just post new sets of values. Clarity around those things is helpful, but how do you change to kind of shift your direction is longer, harder, and more difficult work. Now, there's other ways to think about culture, and you would have heard about them in the module, I think, from Dr. Phillips. There are some cultures that are more shaped by deference to formal authority in the hierarchy, where people, again, just give deference to people based on roles. So there are things you'll say and things you won't say. You'll tend to fall in line more. And that's got incredibly strong attributes. In other words, that kind of conformity allows for some really clean things to happen in organizations. Organizations that live only that way often can become rigid and become tone deaf to important signals in the world and even inside the organization about things that might be ready to change or need to change. So when you rely on a few and when you rely on formal authority to get us through things, it can be really helpful, and it's also fairly dangerous. In fact, there's a little piece of research, I can't remember where it came from, and I'll be real quick on this. Someone did a study of people, I think it was climbing, maybe Mount Everest, and the little cultures of groups that climb with the help of their guide or Sherpa, those that tended to have a culture that was more based on formal authority that allowed the guide to be the expert to tell them what to do, had one kind of trend of success in terms of mortality. How many people died when things got dangerous? And there was another set of kind of cultures of climbing groups that were much more informal. They didn't disrespect their guide, but they were more collaborative and less deferential as they moved up the mountain. And the question was, when did more people die in accidents? Well, the thing you might kind of see this coming, more people died in the deferential hierarchical cultures because they were so dependent on one person being right. And it turned out in complexity, that's a really dangerous thing to do, that more people were at risk more of the time. Whereas in the other groups that were using the whole better and not rejecting the guide, but using their own intelligence to work together and flex together, were much more responsive apparently over time because fewer of them tended to die. I'm going to assume that was statistically significant. I can't back that up in the research, but I found that to be an incredibly interesting study. I'll say one more thing here, and then I'll just let this piece go, and we'll come to conclusion. When we do start talking about culture, I'd say one of the things that is maybe most important is that we just make it discussable, especially if culture is getting in our way. If we sense it's getting in our way, how do we learn to talk about it? And I'm going to use a different word here. How do we learn to get past the myths, M-Y-T-H-S, we're telling about ourselves, about how we roll around here? Because sometimes the stories that are getting told and perpetuated are out of sync with the reality of what's really happening. We have these beliefs about ourselves that we don't always back up. And if we can't actually talk about that gap in some way, we don't have a chance of either filling the gap, bridging the gap, or deciding that something about our culture may actually need to change so that we can better fulfill our emerging purpose. I'm going to tell you just a brief example of something that actually I inherited, but I was quite pleased to have the chance to lead. So I worked in a hospital system for a number of years. And one of the ways that leaders were brought into the organization, one of the experiences, if you were new to the hospital system, was to go to an event called, this is a strange name, the Gallery of Parallel Truths. And it took about 2 hours. It's a very short experience. And you'd go to a place that was set up to be like a museum. So picture a museum, and who helps you in a museum but a docent? And so when this became mine to run in the hospital system, I would introduce myself as a docent and say, I'm going to take you on a tour. And we'd have this very quiet scene, because you know what museums are like. They tend to be fairly quiet. We'd go into the first room, and the first room had all over the walls all these amazing stories about the miracles that had been done in this hospital, the people who've been, and this was a pediatric system, the children whose lives had been saved, and the courageous work of all kinds of healthcare workers and all workers, all staff. And there was this light music playing, and it was a cool atmosphere. And I mean, a warm atmosphere. I literally mean it was like comfortably warm. And you went around there, and just this pride welled up in you about the greatness of the hospital. And then we took you to the second room, and we talked about it a bit, and went to the second room. And the second room was a different story. This room was cold. There was a phone ringing that never got picked up. You could hear the sound played over the sound system. There were different stories posted around the room of frustrated employees and errors being made by healthcare professionals. And the story was basically the opposite. And what we would do after that is we'd go into a third room and we say, how could both of these things be true about us? How could we both have times where we be at our best and times when maybe we're not at our best? And what do we as leaders need to be to get more of that best and less of that worst? And let's have an honest and frank discussion about it. And I have to say that, one, I loved doing that experience, but the impression it made on the new leaders who had come into that organization was this was a place that was willing to talk about what wasn't working so well. We were willing to be candid about it. And there was actually a call to leaders to be a part of doing something about what wasn't working as well as it could so that we could better fulfill our purpose. That's what I mean by how do you make things discussable as opposed to just living by the myth and covering things up that don't go so well and only telling the positive stories and never dealing with what's hard or not working so well or out of sync with what we need to become. I know we haven't really touched a lot on some of the deeper cultural questions because it's a big topic, but I'm hoping that in the context of that module that you have some sense now what it might be about to be a part of cultural change where that's really needed, and to take that seriously. That's actually really hard work, and not work that you do lightly, and not work that you simply announce. It's work that you have to do over time. And it's like trust. Like you get a new culture because you practice something over time and a new culture emerges. Same with trust. You don't get trust by turning a light switch. You get trust by being trustworthy with each other. And that builds up over time. True trust, not just the warmth and competence thing we talked about earlier. So I'm gonna have to skip a bit on this because we're low on time. But I mentioned this polarity idea earlier, and I'm bringing this up here because it's a variation on how to think about culture change. So I mentioned warmth and competence need each other. Well, there are sort of organizational polarities that are important. And I'm citing the work of Barry Johnson here, who wrote a book years ago called Polarity Management. I don't have the citation up on the screen. I apologize. But this is pound for pound one of the most important and helpful things. And it does enable culture change because it's possible there are even little subcultures among us that care deeply about a thing and not so much about another thing. But what if those two things need each other? Like, what if you're on the product side and you've got a competitive mindset and you've got to get to market quickly, and you're really focused on speed, right? And then you've got other people over here who are building product and know that if product isn't ready, if product fails, if product disappoints the buyer, we're going to have issues. We're going to have rework. We're going to have low satisfaction. Customers might actually defect. And it's kind of demoralizing potentially if we're always having to fix stuff that actually could have been made better in the first place, right? So this is an example of, do speed and quality need each other as a polarity? And I'd say the answer is yes. In many places, that if you only focus on quality without regard for speed, you die. If you only focus on speed without regard to quality, you die. And one of the mistakes that leaders make when they think about how do we change the climate or culture around here is they say, we have a speed problem, we're too slow. We've got to, in a sense, reject quality and focus on speed. And that sounds like I become the champion of speed, let's go fast. But they don't realize how they're getting in their own way. They don't realize that the system will resist them because quality will always matter. And there always will be people who will protect quality, right? So what they're really doing when you treat this like a problem to be solved, where the problem is quality, the answer is speed, is that we tend to polarize. And again, if there are cultures of people, whether they're product people or engineers, or whatever, who care about one pole and not the other, these groups will tend to set themselves against each other in a way that's actually unnecessary. So to me, this idea of polarity management is a way to, how do we actually start to work together in the system where if we can all acknowledge that speed and quality both matter, we have a chance of deciding in this moment, what do we need to lean into more? Maybe we need to lean into more of speed. Maybe we need to lean into a little more quality, but our goal is to get the best of both of these and hopefully not get the worst of both of these. So polarities is an idea. It's not part of the course, but it's a part of the work I do almost all the time with clients these days. Is if you're just trying to treat culture as a problem, you're going to recreate the problem. But if you treat it as the polarity, you can actually make directional progress on things in a way that would surprise you. Sorry, that was fast. We're at the end, right? So I'm just going to touch back on your 360 paper, the kind of the exercise you're being asked to do. Now, if somehow you end up without 360 results, and you want to get this paper done and get credit for it, you have an option. You're just going to need to use the feedback you already have about you that you've picked up over time, or that you could actively solicit from other people. Those of you who took the personal leadership and success class, you got feedback, but you also did some asking of other people. Tell me something about me, right? So you can actually go look for some feedback yourself. And of course, you've had it from others over time. So what do you make of the historic feedback that you've received? So you have an option, even without a report, to do this reflection activity and to create a bit of a plan for yourself about how you want to change. And you'll see, I have some questions here on the right that are sort of potentially helpful as you think about doing this. I'm really interested in what are the insights you've picked up? What do you notice about not just how do you experience you, but how do other people experience you, right? And when you're thinking about change in behavior, what things do you need to do differently? And some of that's on the outside, but what do you need to do maybe on the inside to make that change possible? What do you need to do with you to behave in that different way on the outside? And are there contexts where this matters more and less, or where you need to read situations better, people in situations differently? That can be a thing to work on all by itself. This is all up to you, and this is what you're motivated to work on. So I'll be really excited to hear about it. But the last thing I want to say as we go is not just to put together a plan that you think is important for you and that you can kind of commit to and mobilize yourself around, but it may be something you do want to enlist others in going forward. Those of you who took the personal leadership and success class know this idea from Marshall Goldsmith called feed forward. So it can be really helpful and actually credibility building to tell others about what you're working on. One, those who gave you feedback may be encouraged to see that you've taken input seriously and that there's something that you want to do that matters, right? But also this notion of letting people in on the open secret that there are things that you could do better, and saying, like, I'm in that game too. I am committed to making changes and improving things about me and my leadership, I think sends a positive signal and can be very credibility building and trust building to others, that especially like, hey, we're all kind of like each other. We all need to get better at things. And so if some people experience you as the know-it-all who's got it all together, there's a good chance that's off-putting to others, even if they respect you. And so the humility side that says, hey, I'm actually open to working on something and I'd like your help. The literal feed forward idea from Goldsmith is, you might say, I want to work on X. And you go around to 10 people and you say, I'm committed to working on X. What idea do you have for me that might enable me to do that? And you literally go around and get ideas for people. Now, most of those ideas may be horrible. You may, but don't reject them. All you do is thank other people for their ideas, because somewhere in there, there's going to be gold, or it's going to help you come up with something yourself better that you can take action on, right? So the feed forward activity is a way to engage other people in public, in a sense, in the fact that you're a leader who wants to get better and maybe needs to get better. And I think that does something to potentially enhance your credibility as you keep going. I'm out of time. Thank you for being here today. Again, apologies for the lateness. Look forward to looking at papers. And as you have other questions along the way, feel free to reach out to me. If they're program mechanic questions, feel free to reach out to the program team through the support tab in Canvas, and we'll take care of what you need. We will do our best. Thanks again, and hopefully we'll see each other someday down the road here in one of our emeritus courses. Take care. Bye-bye.